Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Transcription services provided by transcribeme.com. Visit them on the web at transcribeme.com/BeanCast for up to 25% off. That's transcribeme.com. Episode 504. Change is hard. Monday, July 16th, 2018. It's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob Norp. Thanks for joining us. The idea that online content can be offered as ad-supported for some while being ad-free for subscribers is a very common model. But is this approach cheapening both the value and effectiveness of the ad side of the equation? Tonight we'll discuss. Also, whether shrinking consumer attention is really an advertising problem, why feel-good content still works, evolving data into action, plus this week's Ad Fail 5. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with finance executive, professional coach, and personal branding expert, author, speaker, Miss Tamara Lashchyk. Tamara, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Now, also joining us, we have the CEO of Casebook PBC, technology pioneer, Mr. Tristan Louis. Tristan, you have a lot to celebrate this evening, don't you?
I do, thanks to the success of the French in the World Cup. But pleasure to be here.
Happy to have you on board. Now, next up, we have the chairman of Streamlined Media and CEO of Bold Culture, Mr. Darren Martin. Darren, welcome to the program.
Hi, Bob. Thanks for having me.
And finally, we're pleased to have back the Chief Marketing Officer of WNYC New York Public Radio, Mr. Peter Weingard. Peter, hello.
Bob, thank you for having me on the show.
Happy to have you on. Well, I'm going to jump right into the topics, as is my prerogative. And I wanted to get into this first issue because it's a real interesting one. More and more content publishers are turning to a freemium model, giving consumers a choice of viewing content ad-free if they pay a subscription. Now, on the surface, this seems like an elegant solution, Peter. I mean, it kind of gives the best of both worlds. You can have the content and live for free, or you can pay a little bit of money and have no ads. But is there a possibility, just a possibility, that publishers are cheapening the value of their ad units by doing this? And what's the impact of this to the ecosystem? Your take on this situation?
Yeah, well, I think what happened is the ad values already cheapened themselves, so the publishers are just reacting to that. And it's been a long time coming. Generally speaking, and this is my opinion here alone, but I think there are probably other people who share it with me, is that we're heading towards a real reckoning in media, and maybe you want to call it an overall deflation in the value of media. There's just so much of it because of the internet, because the ability now to access media from all over the world and user-generated content, there's just no end to it. It's nearly infinite. And when you have infinite supply that exceeds demand, then the value of it decreases. So I think the value of the advertising that supports media has been going down consistently.
But I mean, your point's well taken. I mean, I agree with you that there's an endless supply of online media, and that cheapens the value of the product. And yet, there's not. I mean, the subscription models. I know for your operation, your subscriptions are not nearly as big as your ad revenue when you're talking about, the podcast arena or the online content.
Well, there's not really a subscription model. We're a nonprofit. People give us money as a gift, right? So they're not really buying anything from us. The content is free always, and we ask if you like the content. We're almost like the original Kickstarter model, right? We're producing something and then asking people after the fact if they like it to kick in. Subscription model, possibly a little different. But you might say in some ways, well, yes.
Yeah, but I mean, the point still is, I mean, yes, I'm wrong about your particular operation, but I mean, in terms of the subscription versus ad revenue model, most of the subscription models that are out there are either have some ads included in the subscription model, or they're ad free, and most people are choosing to go and experience the content in a freemium manner. So I'm wondering, is this really as much of a problem as the author of the article that I read is considering it to be?
It's a good question. Whether I was going to ask you a problem for whom exactly. I don't think it's a problem for publishers long term so much as it is a problem for brands that want to reach people at scale and no longer have good vehicles in which to do that. So there's pain on all sides of this equation. It's difficult for consumers to be reached by ads that are relevant and interesting, or certainly in the digital arena, being delivered in a format that you want to actually see. It's difficult for publishers because the audience being attenuated, you no longer have the scale in which to charge premiums for advertising. And for the brands, there's a loss in that wonderful channel that they had for the first 70 or 80 years of the last century, when you were able to reach really cheaply a great percentage of consumers in the country. So the whole infrastructure, the whole model of media-supported advertising, or advertising-supported media, is going away and being reinvented before our eyes.
Darren, I want to get you in on this because you're the media buyer. You're the one who's planning this type of stuff out there in the marketplace. Are you seeing a cheapening of the value of the ad unit, and is this model actually affecting you in any kind of negative manner?
I think on the agency side, right, and doing direct buys, no. Of course, you look at programmatic and how that drove CPMs all the way down, and completely, I believe, gave control to brands and how they can, what websites they can be on, and that control that they have to place their brand on certain sites, which took away the I think onus on the actual publisher to have some type of privilege to charge what they want to charge, aka a premium, right? But for me, I've seen that if you have a great audience, if they're loyal, one, they're going to either buy that subscription and they won't mind that subscription, i.e. you look at the New York Times and their apparent and intentional drive to increase their subscriptions, and how that's more than their actual ad revenue at this point. In the ad industry, and I think it's just for us as a media buyer, as a planner, looking at which sites or which media companies has the best audiences, the most engaging audiences, the ones that are coming back, and then trying to figure out how we place the right media, right creative on that website.
And I know, Tristan, you were jumping in to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the challenges there is that it's a bit of a self-inflicted wound, right? About 20 years ago, in the digital space at least, the decision was made that CPMs were going to roll all, and with no regards in particular to the type of audience that was being delivered. And that seem to have devalued the quality of audiences, which has then been kind of a race to the bottom in terms of programmatic. And that's now forcing publishers, in a world where content is pretty widespread, to rethink their model.
I agree.
Right. Well, audience became pork bellies, right? Where they're all the same and interchangeable in a digital infrastructure, and you were just buying where you can get it the cheapest.
Yep.
Another thing that keeps me up at night when I'm thinking about this particular problem is whether or not there's this economic divide being created by the freemium model. And I'm wondering specifically about whether or not it's going to be harder to reach a premium market. We've talked about this on the show previously, but I wanted to get your guys' take on it. Tammy, any thoughts on that particular angle? I mean, it's... we're creating this two-tier structure where part of the audience is not seeing advertising because they have money, and that's the audience that we want to reach most of the time, are the people who have the money to supposedly get rid of our ads. So how do we manage that? How do we navigate that?
Well, I think it's a tough one to navigate.
Someone has sirens going on in the background, so if they can mute, that would be fantastic. But go ahead, Tammy.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I sort of question the whole freemium model to begin with, and wonder that over time, does the freemium model even really work? I mean, there's a certain amount of economics that you have to pay close mind to in order to make sure that you're getting, the proper ROI. And, the companies that are using them, particularly ones who've had success, have they been in business long enough to declare victory, in this as a sustainable model? And I think, to your earlier point, I think the quality of advertising has diminished, because when you see quality advertising, then people do have the time to actually watch the ad. So,
yeah, that gets into what we're going to talk about next, and I don't mind talking a little bit about it now, which is this idea of consumer attention being all on the consumer, that consumers are somehow having their attention divided, and that's why they're not paying attention, when the reality is it could be that we're just creating such bad advertisements that people don't want to pay attention to it, and they're paying to get rid of it. And it may the onus may be on the advertisers and their agencies about providing better ad content to the mix.
Right. And just one more point, going back to the freemium model, to the point of there is so much content that is out there, that how do you offer this content for free and hope to then convert? I think that's a tough nut to crack, because I think, I understand the whole concept of it. I understand that increases users over a short amount of time, but that conversion, I think, is really tough to make. And especially as content grows so quickly, exponentially, I think it's going to become a harder model to sustain profitability.
This freemium model sounds like such a good idea, Peter. There's so much about it that's appealing from a consumer standpoint. You're getting an audience to give you money for the content directly. You're getting a better experience for the consumer, who gets to just get the content that they're paying for and not have to experience ads and be interrupted during that process. It seems so good, and yet it doesn't work, and it's not being able to be rolled out in scale with any kind of effectiveness. Like, the only subscription models that work are the ones that are purely subscription models.
Well, I mean, I think that's exactly everyone's point, is that we're sitting here trying to retrofit a model that was developed for a different set of purposes, right? But the problem here is also that we're blocking certain. I forget who said it. That one of the challenges here is that people who can afford to pay for content are the people that you most want to reach with ads, and that's what seems to be in jeopardy here. But the kinds of advertising, especially online advertising, is just but one type of marketing and one type of promotion that's available to marketers. So yes, one channel out of many may be in danger of becoming irrelevant, because people never wanted to get it or receive messages through that channel anyway. When you're talking about attention, I think we forget that people don't care. I'm trying to interrupt someone's day and take away their valuable time to talk about my product, which they may or may not be interested in at all. So yeah, the onus is on us marketers to figure out better ways of reaching prospects in ways that are interesting and entertaining and valuable. And the model so far has been really take advantage of monopoly on distribution to interrupt people in the middle of the content.
Darren, something that is on my mind, and I've been talking about it on the show for the last few weeks, is this idea that maybe over the top is not the solution, that maybe over the top is more about fragmenting. And I think there's a lot to be said about the same thing going on with this freemium model. that, I know this is getting complicated on my part, but, when you think about the way the cable TV model worked, a few big networks continued to get most of the money from the ad revenue, while the rest of the networks that are on the cable package were subsidized because users were paying for cable packages, and they got this small bump, these carriage fees, as a result of being able to be on the lineup of a cable network. And it seems like we need a solution like that. We need to go back from the a la carte mess that we're in and get into a situation where the carrier is maybe giving a little kickback to the networks in order to provide this long tail content with enough revenue to continue. I mean,
yeah, and I think, but when we're thinking in digital, and just going back to digital, when we think of digital, it's just so hard to do that.
You're right.
It's so many different audiences, so many different blogs, and then we go into the entire influencer and micro influencer game. I do think that for the smart marketer, the smart agency, using digital, using over the top, using even television advertising, and making that mix is what's going to be effective. It's what's going to allow you to see some type of ROI and engagement from that television spot that you now placed on, let's say, a Facebook, and then many different media companies. And so the users are able to click, engage, and then go to, let's say, your website or landing page for that. But it's going to take, I think, smart media, and it's going to take more integrated media. And the industry is still in silos, right? You still have your television, you still have your digital print, even OTT, that entire conversation in itself. And so until we get more integrated, until we start having conversations across departments, I think that that's where all of this, the media ecosystem has its worst, I'd say it that's its worst problem. It's not being integrated enough.
Well, is there a better solution? Does anybody have a better solution?
So, well, one of the things that I'm thinking about is maybe we relearn our history and actually tie the brands more closely to the content that is being shown. I know Peter might actually have something to say about this, because that's something that WNYC and public radios tend to do pretty well in terms of having brands support a particular type of reporting or a particular reporting vertical. And I think if you're looking historically at the television model, that's where some of the initial TV shows were supported. And so maybe that's we need to go back to something like this in the digital realm.
Well, they call it branded content now, like it's that idea that we created something new, where it's not new at all. To your point, it's, something that started when television was invented, but we start making these new terms and make it more difficult than it actually is.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, if you want to go back even further, then is it the Night Before Christmas? That book was actually written by, I think it was Wanamaker's department store. It's for something to give out as gifts when people shopped at the store. So brands creating content is, sort of as old as advertising itself. And brands have to learn to become more creative again. And it's more work to try and create something of value for your customers. That's either, written content, media content, or some kind of experiential content. I think what we're feeling the results of, and I think a lot of this conversation is about how marketers have, from the last 60 years, 70 years, become really lazy because things like television made communicating to mass audiences creatively really, really simple and really cheap to buy. And now it's becoming hard again.
And maybe that's where the rise of the agency creative is going to come from.
The rise of the agency creative. Come on, the agency creatives have already risen up and they're running the roost. Well, moving on, I wanted to talk about another topic that's very, very similar. As ads become less effective, we hear more and more about shrinking consumer attention spans. Now, there's too many distractions out there. We understand that. You have the situation with the cell phones, you have the situation with computers and tablets, and you have people on the go instead of sitting down in the living room to watch their content. You've got distractions all around. But Darren, is consumer attention the real problem? Or is there something else at play here? Like maybe what I suggested earlier, like the ads aren't good enough. What would you say?
Yeah, I think the idea of short attention spans is an insight, but it shouldn't be a foundation for why advertisers are moving to shorter ad forms, right? I remember the industry flocking heavily to this model shortly, maybe after Snapchat made it popular when they were making their rounds around the industry prior to their IPO. And for me, it doesn't matter if an ad is 6 seconds or 30 seconds. What matters is the story you're telling. It matters who you're still telling the story to, and if it's culturally connected to their lifestyle. And as a content creator or agency, 6-second ads are a fun challenge, but they might not fully express the mission of the brand. And as an advertiser, it could increase my vanity metrics, but what's the efficacy, right? So understanding the community you're creating content for will help you stay relevant to audiences. And from a campaign perspective, I maybe introduce my brand with a 6-second ad that's non-intrusive, and as I build trust with that community, with that specific audience, I'd extend my ad to maybe 30, 15, 30, 45, or even longer. um, I've seen some successful 6-second ads, but it's not taking over the industry as a whole yet. And I've seen some really great, again, short ads. I've seen some longer ad forms that have really compelled me to watch until the end. And so while attention span is something that we should think about, we should also be thinking about who we're talking to, and is the creative that we're making compelling enough for them to sit and watch it? Because they will.
I do want to. I want to push back a little bit here because I actually agree with you for the most part about the fact that 6-second ads are not a panacea. They're not going to solve the problems, and that you need to be able to tell a larger story. However, when you're talking about a brand that is well known and well accepted and has good awareness scores across the board, a 6 seconds is enough most of the time to get across your message. Like I can still tell you that and this is not because I'm in advertising, this is just because it was effective. It's during the Olympics. I still remember that Toyota was always doing those 6-second ads in between the breaks, and it was effective because I understand who Toyota is. I know what their mission is. I know what they make. I understand what they're trying to do. I understand the concepts that they were trying to get across, and it was done in 6 seconds because I have all this brand memory already attached to it. If you had a new startup or a company that people had never heard of doing something like that, it would be completely ludicrous to do a 6-second
For
ad.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think it only works for big brands, and even then, if it's not done well, or if the history of the brand is not as solidified, let's say as a Toyota, it doesn't make sense sometimes. I was just thinking about a Five Gum commercial that they actually play as a commercial on FX, or they were, and I just didn't understand what it meant. I think it was a 7-second ad, and I just didn't understand it. It just did not make sense for me. And I think it's a part of having, it's a very nuanced storytelling method. And so if you don't have the correct agency creating that 6-second ad, then you're not going to get your story across, even if it's only for brand awareness. And, then we have to look at how much brand awareness do we want to see, especially with online advertising versus someone taking action. And does 6-second ads allow someone to know what they're buying or get them enticed enough to click or to really engage with your brand? It does work. I've seen marketers, I've looked at research that said they love it. They actually suggest 10 seconds or less, which gives you some extra time. But the majority of them are still going for 15 to 30s just as much as they're going for shorter.
Yeah, I also think it was Peter who brought up the timing of the ads in the freemium model versus paying for no ads. I think the timing of ads is also important. I think you raised a really good point. When my time is precious and I want to be listening to music, I don't want to be disrupted by an ad. So I would have more patience to watch or listen to a longer ad of quality if the timing suited me as well.
Yeah, we have a lot of good evidence of this in podcasting, where often we've made ads that were somewhat more extravagant or interactive and somehow engaging and tied to the host or the content in some interesting way. Perhaps a theme here really needs to be that advertisers and brands can't be lazy about this stuff. It takes thought to break through. And by the way, fact check it. Well, I was wrong. It's Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer that was published by Montgomery.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of strange because I'm sitting there going, that is not true. Oh man. Well, but let's talk. Bring this back because I think we're getting off the rails talking about shorter content and how we can effectively communicate to an audience in shorter formats versus longer formats, or whether or not longer formats need to be married to shorter formats and everything else along those lines. But what about consumer attention, Tristan? I mean, it's just like, is consumer attention really the problem here? Or have we just reneged on our deal with consumers and consumers are fed up with us? I mean, which would you say is the bigger problem, and how do advertisers need to respond to that? Did I lose you, Tristan? Probably did.
Well, I'll add one thing to that, which is we've seen research that measures media consumption and shows that people now consume more media than their time is that they're actually awake because of media stacking. They're on the phone while they're watching TV, while they're listening to something else. So I do think attention has become much more scarce.
It has, but there's also a bit of a backlash happening from the consumers. I mean, we're seeing it with a number of consumers that are installing ad blocker on their device because, frankly, they're fed up with the poor quality content that's been pushed onto them. And I think that's I know that we keep circling the same topic here, but it goes back to the quality of the content that we're pushing in their direction.
Well, that's right. No, we talked about supply and demand. There's also almost endless supply of advertising now, because whereas it used to be a very specialized skill, and you had to go to a handful of big ad agencies that created advertising to get onto these relatively difficult channels. You couldn't just walk out and buy TV. But now you can walk out, you could sit in your apartment and place ads on Google, YouTube, anywhere, show up all around the world. So there's no longer any skill involved with even creating or buying advertising.
Yeah, we've talked about this in the program before, and I love this. If you've never read Madison Avenue Manslaughter, and I know the audience is probably saying, oh my God, he's going to recommend that book again, but Madison Avenue Manslaughter by Michael Farmer kind of takes you through this process that during the worst recession in U.S. history, during the 70s, advertising was making more money than any other industry because media was scarce, and you could still charge 15% on everything that you placed. So it was an endless cash cow because business was down. Everybody was advertising when business is down. The media was static. You ended up with a lot more money. But that's just not the case now. And we have so much content out there and so many advertising opportunities. And the programmatic universe is just going gangbusters. And you've got 500 cable channels that you can advertise on any particular cable lineup. I mean, how do we stay consistently relevant, Darren? I mean, to an audience that's so discriminating at this point upon what kind of content they're going to watch?
I think it, and I hate to say it again, it goes back into the quality as well. It's more so cultural awareness, right? And it takes time from the agency. It takes time on the marketer's side to understand and go back to the audience being the first thing that we're looking at, and what are their interests, what are they like, what are they engaging on, and then what content are we now putting our brand or matching our brand to. I say this all the time, and going back to attention span, that Gen Z millennials, they're on YouTube heavily watching 30-minute clips of their favorite influencers. They're on Instagram TV that just launched that has an ability for long form content to 60 seconds, both in theater and vertical view. So long form content will always be there. And I think it's on us to make sure that we're integrating ourselves and our campaigns into how people are watching, not necessarily thinking that they're not watching or they don't have the time to do things. I think, as everyone has said, people are doing multiple things and are engaging with multiple forms of media at once. and it does take away what traditionally would look at as being a focus on one specific media channel. But people have been doing it well. And if you look at how people use Twitter to live tweet and how that boosted, content and brand awareness for television shows, right? How can we accept this new reality and start to move forward is my question, and forget about the insights around, people aren't paying attention, and millennials are lazy, they won't watch ads. It's about what's actually connecting to them that they will interact with this. And if we're thinking about that, then we don't have to worry about we will have to worry about the content channels that we're putting things on, but we won't have to worry about the attention span of the consumer.
Well, speaking of content that connects with consumers, the days of viral feel-good videos getting endless shares on Facebook seem to have been long gone. But with the advent of Facebook Watch, their video streaming service, some publishers are claiming that feel-good content is still pulling in phenomenal numbers, which I find completely fascinating and a little troubling. So, Tammy, building on the idea of staying relevant to consumer interests, is this tactic something that advertisers should be kind of exploring further and making part of their repertoire?
Yeah, I think that they should. And the reason that I think they should, and something that we haven't touched upon in any of these discussions, is the human condition and what actually elicits or evokes a response from people. I think everybody loves a feel-good commercial, whether you're, from another older generation, or you're from the millennial Gen X, Gen Z, or whatever. So I think that that's one thing that connects us all, that connects all the generations and all of us as human beings. And one thing we also didn't touch upon in this is loyalty. You have this whole millennial generation. And this is, again, I don't mean to digress back to the freemium model.
No, this is a fluid conversation. I love when we pull back from previous topics, so you just keep going.
Okay. So one of the other reasons why I question, the validity of the freemium model is because I wonder how much loyalty it actually builds over time. And, again, with all this content that's out there and all this, quick growth, I don't think that it takes into consideration a building of relationships, which then create loyalty. And I think that that's particularly a challenge with the younger generations, a particular challenge that advertisers are going to have in capturing the attention of the younger generations. But when it comes to, touching upon, hitting the nerve of a human element, I think that's what you have to go with, because that's what always gets a response. Every time I post something on Facebook, whether it's, I've posted videos that are 20 minutes long. I don't know if you saw the karaoke with Paul McCartney. I mean, that was like a 20-minute video, and it got hundreds of reposts and people commenting because it had nostalgia. It was reminiscent. It just made you feel good. It was familiar. It had all these songs that everyone loved.
But putting counterpoint to that, because I think you're right. I mean, content like that is feel good, that's really uplifting, tends to be really something that connects with an audience. However, when you're talking about deploying it from an advertising standpoint, first of all, if you're doing a truly self-sacrificing, feel-good video, you've got to figure out how your brand connects in it, and all it's coming down to is borrowed interest as opposed to really direct value being generated from the ad. And then when you try to do something that's self-serving, it's open to criticism. So I'm wondering whether or not, it'll work for any brand, or just a brand that is actually committed and known for the feel-good elements that are being presented.
So, Bob, I think that that's actually part of the wider discussion around corporate and social responsibility, right? Millennials want to see brands that are socially aligned with what they believe in. And so the messaging that happens, the feel-good messaging, must align with a brand kind of mission. And in a world where increasingly messaging has gotten politicized, and where our political parties are now operating in totally different spheres, trying to bring people back to the middle with those kinds of feel-good messages that appeal to everyone is probably the only way brands can truly differentiate themselves.
Well, and
I, I agree. Yeah, I would agree with that. And just to underscore one point, I would have said something regarding authenticity, but I'm not sure that we've ever really correlated advertising with authenticity.
Well,
So
exactly my point. I mean, it seems like this is a great opportunity for content providers to capitalize on Facebook again by generating these feel-good videos. From an advertising standpoint, I think a big red flag goes up because of the authenticity problem. And, really having to do some soul searching about whether or not your brand is connected strongly enough with the feel-good message that's being presented, or whether it's just going to look self-serving and kind of opportunistic.
right, I think that's an opportunity for the agency to step into a more consultative approach to its client, right? You know, for us, we talk about, Tammy, I love the idea of resonating, right? Creating that relatable content. But in order to retain any consumer, particularly millennials, you have to have consistent content, consistency, not only in your content, but also in your mission. So things like the Papa John's situation will not connect to something if they put out on Facebook a happy-go-lucky type of ad, because they're within a scandal right now, so it doesn't fit their brand. People are moving away from it. It would not resonate, and they would not retain their consumers, specifically millennials. So I do think that it's feel good content, but outside of even feel good content, I think it's content that is authentic. You look at the Super Bowl commercials, I think of 2 years ago, right? And things that resonated with conversations, and with the human nature of people did well because it struck a common core. And I think that that's what was so successful with Facebook and the feel good content that we're seeing. We saw that with Little Things. When they were alive, the idea that they were making so much great feel good content that they were, a top 5 or top 10 publisher on Facebook itself. I don't think that advertisers as a whole can grapple with it, or grab onto it, unless their advertisers or their marketers and their clients are actually connected to that at the foundation of the mission of their company.
And I think this fits really, really nicely into what you teach and talk about, Tammy. It's just like I feel like I've been, kind of interrupting you, and I think I need to come back to it because this is really something that is core to what you always preach about, which is consistency of message and really getting to the core identity of the brand, whether you're talking about a corporate brand or you're talking about an individual brand.
Absolutely. And I mean, I always tell people, when they're embarking on their careers, authenticity is key, but it's also, when you're marketing yourself, it's also, we have multiple dimensions and we're quite broad. It's also selecting, a certain to reveal a certain part of your personality or persona in the appropriate place. So, I mean, with brands, it may be a little bit different. They might not be as broad and diverse as a human personality, but there certainly are elements that you can highlight and showcase depending on what you think will appeal to the audience. I think it's more critical nowadays for advertising and companies to be authentic and aligned with their advertising and their true mission, because they will be uncovered. Years ago when we didn't have, so much access to so much information at our fingertips, it became more difficult to challenge. Like if you had an ad for say Monsanto, and they try to sell you on some good that they're doing when you know that they're when most people won't know whether they're really doing good or not doing good. But nowadays you'll just Google it right up and you'll find what the company's doing and what they're all about, and you're like, wait, they just sold me this great feel good ad. What a phony. So I do think nowadays, with information being so accessible so quickly, companies and advertisers have to be careful to make sure that their messaging is aligned.
And that's a perfect segue into the next topic, which is I wanted to talk next about data. We're never at a lack of data. And while most advertisers can point to targeting solutions using their wealth of data that they have at their disposal, Tristan, why are so few businesses and media companies still resisting operational changes that are indicated by the insights that we're uncovering? I mean, it seems like we have this big gap between data and analytics and understanding versus actually doing something with the data and taking concrete actions to affect the consumer in meaningful ways. What's the backup?
I think I can reduce this answer to 4 words because change is hard.
I can reduce it to 4 other words. Not enough money available.
Yeah. I mean, when you're talking about taking the data, which talks about the perception of your organization, and then reshaping your organization to change the perception of that organization, it takes time. And not only does it take time, but it takes money. And when you've got a choice between pleasing your shareholders by increasing the number of sales and therefore potentially doing things that may not be in the feel-good arena of things, like cutting staff or exporting jobs or things along those lines, versus make fundamental change that is going to take a long time to really return on your investment, you're going to look at the short term and you're going to make the decisions that are actually most applicable to the short term. And that's why no matter how much data we're presenting, it's going to be very difficult for organizations to turn around. Now, there are some ways in which those organizations can turn around. One is if your founding team is already there and really believes in the message, or if your founding team is returning. I think the example of this was probably the best example of this is Apple, where Apple had lost its way. The founder came back, put the company back on the track, and led it until he died. The other times when change conditions are created is when the company is having a fundamental identity crisis. I think you could argue that the current situation with Papa John may actually create an opportunity for them, the company, or the controversies that have existed around Starbucks are allowing them to create a new dialogue with the consumer and potentially change the fundamentals operationally of the company to line up more with where they want to take the company.
Peter, I want to continue this conversation with you because if I can think of one great company that has done a phenomenal job of taking data and actually putting it into action, it would have to be what you guys are doing with podcasting as a whole. I mean, you understood not just that this was a big movement in the industry and the audience and the potential, but you also saw that it was an opportunity for you guys to make money in a meaningful way from ad revenue because you were no longer being restricted by the covenants with public radio and public broadcast airwaves. It's a phenomenal story. How did you guys manage that?
Well, I mean, I think we're lucky that despite being a 94-year-old public media company and a nonprofit, we're actually a particularly entrepreneurial group. And I think because a lot of us are just in New York and came from commercial media and we saw the opportunity emerging. The other thing that happens in public radio that's advantageous is because we're supported by these contributions from our members, we have this direct connection. I mean, there's no better data point than that. People let us know with their dollars every day what if they like what we're doing or not, and they happen to be a particularly vocal group. So we believe me, if there's a grammatical error on something, you'll hear about it within 10 minutes. some listeners. But the data points that we use, I think, have become even more interesting since getting into the podcast business, and I think we've become extremely data centric in trying to understand what people like in terms of the content that we create. What listening patterns are. And in fact, it's through this data that we're able to know, for example, that our listeners do not skip the ads. And we can tell when they do. So you can begin to know, like, ooh, they did not like that, and maybe we need to be more like this. And so paying attention to data, I think most media companies are particularly good at this. And we happen to be swimming in data, and we look at it all the time.
I will caveat that. I think that most media companies are good at noticing the data and then using that data for targeting audience, but they're not very good about making that marching order to change the operational structure and to implement new paradigms for how to go out into the marketplace and deliver content. I mean, often it just boils down to, we know this about the audience, let's use this data to target this audience with an advertisement from this brand. And it's...
Well, I mean, not Netflix, not Amazon, not a lot of the people who maybe you may call media businesses today that started out as technology businesses. Maybe therein lies the rub.
Yeah, very, very true. Very, very true. Darren, you work with data on a regular basis. Do you see this as being as much a problem as the author of this article seems to suggest, that data is not being put into action, or is it less about that and more about just managing the data?
I think it's a management of the data. It's also the insights that come from the data. And I've worked with clients who wanted so many data points because that's a larger, again, conversation in the industry. But when you give them the data, or you give them the insights, they're still slow to change operationally. And many of those insights and many of those data points do point to some things that you need to change internally, particularly for media companies. And I think because it's such a slow point of change, maybe from an executive perspective, or even resource perspective, we have all of this data, but many companies can't do anything with it. The companies who are doing things with it, the companies like Amazon, like Netflix, who are using that tech and that data to inform their platform, are going to be the ones who are winning in the next, not even 5 years, but I think 3 years, if not now. And so
one of the problems I have with the example of Netflix and Amazon is their behemoths. They control so much of the marketplace, and to say that they're using the data, and that if you used your data and operationalize your data, you could be just as effective. It seems kind of silly to put that forward, because you're at such a disadvantage to the data and the analytics that are available to these big companies.
I disagree with you, and I think that really there was an important point that was made a little bit earlier, which is that there's a difference between data and insights. And there's this sentence that's tossed off of data being the new oil, and I think it's a very appropriate thing, because oil by itself is completely useless. Oil, when it is processed and refined, then becomes either a fuel or a plastic. And so that's where real value is derived. And I think data by itself is completely useless. Data, when it's properly analyzed and then put in play and turned into insights, becomes really something valuable. And you don't have to actually have a massive amount of data in order to turn it into valuable insights.
Yeah, but to quote that article a little bit further about the data is the new oil, the problem with that paradigm, or that image or metaphor, is the fact that data is plentiful and so are insights, whereas oil is something that is scarce and can rise in value based on the availability that's there. So, from a standpoint of data, we have so much data. What we need is action. And it's just like, it seems like so many companies are so afraid to take action. Tammy, do you have any last thoughts on this? Any thoughts on whether or not what companies can do to manage their data flow better so that they can actually put it into action in meaningful ways at a quicker pace?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't work in media, but I do work at a big corporation, and I do know that shifting the strategy of a big corporation is like literally trying to get the Titanic to avoid the iceberg. It's just slow. It's bureaucratic. Oftentimes, your leadership isn't aligned and doesn't necessarily agree, and there's risks involved, unless you're facing some type of, serious existential crisis and your survival is threatened. There's no real, impotence for change. If it's working or working reasonably well, then why fix it? So I think that there's a certain reluctance within corporations to make any dramatic changes. And it's difficult to do even if you wanted to. Um,
Yeah,
so there's
exactly.
also to the point of, data by itself is sort of, meaningless. You know, the insights that you garner from the data, you know, it could be a matter of someone's perception. I know that, we do a lot of analytics as in my company, but, oftentimes you have this data and how you slice it is going to give you a certain results, especially when you look at things like league table data, which is how we measure success of various investment banking transactions. You come out saying, oh, this bank's number one and this bank's number one, but it depends on how you cut the data, whether it's number of deals, whether it's volume of deals and stuff like that. So you always have to, take data and look at it with context. So there's a certain unreliability to it as well. And when you're on the management board, it's very difficult to, say, okay, this is the data that was given to me by our internal strategy group. And, do I trust the opinion of this group to now change the direction of the entire ship? I mean, there's a lot of risks involved
That
here.
makes so much sense. I mean, it makes so much sense because we talk over and over again about you can make the data say anything you want it to say. And that makes it hard for companies to get behind the data and make decisions because the data can be interpreted in dozens of different ways. I mean, it's not
Yeah.
always the same result every time you look at it. So that's problematic. Well, we're running out of time, so it's time for the Ad Fail 5. But before we get to that segment of the show, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug, starting with Tamara Lashchyk. You can find her at tamaralashchyk.com. Don't worry about the spelling. I'll have the link in the show notes so you can go there. Tammy, what's going on in your world? What would you like to promote?
Well, I've just recently launched my website, which has an interactive blog where people can write in career questions, and I respond in two ways: one by email, and the other with an anonymous blog post. I don't use people's names when they write me their questions, so it's getting a lot of traction and a lot of popularity. So I would encourage anyone who is looking to enhance their career and needs some strategic advice to reach out and ask a question.
And Tammy's incredibly helpful. I mean, I had a great time talking with you over coffee recently, so thank you very much for participating on the program. Next up, Tristan Louis. You can find him at casebook.net. That's where he's CEO, the newly appointed CEO, from what they say on their website. Tell us what's going on in your world. What would you like to promote?
So casebook.net has nothing to do with marketing because we actually help the people that are on the front line into helping the most vulnerable members of our society with software. So I'm not going to promote this to this particular audience because that would be the wrong content for the wrong audience. What I'm going to ask everyone in the audience to do, though, is if you do know someone that does not listen to the BeanCast today, go and tell them.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, and I echo that. We need lots more listeners, so definitely do that for us. Thank you very much, Tristan. Next up, we have Darren Martin. You can find him at many different websites, but the one I'm going to promote today is streamlinedmedia.co. That's the home of Streamlined Media, the company where he is chairman. Tell us what's going on in your world, Darren. What would you like to promote?
Yeah, thank you, Bob. Yeah, so Streamline Media and Communication is a independent parent company. We actually have two companies that we're running. Streamline Media is a digital media and communications agency. So if you want more customers or you're trying to build more audiences that are authentic and that you actually can retain, you can reach us at getstreamline.co. And Bold Culture is a multicultural communication agency. And so we work with brands and agencies to authentically connect to diverse audiences and also change their internal structure to resonate and retain diverse talent. So you can find us at boldculture.co. And we were recently featured in the Cannes issue of Adweek. So I want to shout out our team for that.
And that's how I managed to get in touch with you, was over that article. It's just like I'd read the black paper long ago, and I said, man, I got to get in touch with him. So we had a fantastic time talking. Very glad to have you on the program. Hope you'll come back.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
And next up, we have Peter Weingard. You can find him at wnyc.org. That's the home of New York Public Radio. Tell us what's going on in your world, Peter. What would you like to promote?
You know, we're busy. Hey, the midterm elections are going to be coming up soon. I would encourage all listeners and Americans to pay close attention to what's going on in their local races. I'd say support independent journalism by supporting your local public radio station and listen to lots of podcasts.
Yes. And a good source for podcasts is WNYC. Such phenomenal content going on over there. So definitely check them out if you haven't already. As for me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me, and you can even find out how to advertise on the program. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And don't forget, transcribeme.com/beancast is the place where you can get your transcriptions done. They are the official transcription partner at the BeanCast. And that's where you're getting your transcriptions of the show now. They are about a week behind the episodes, but if you need a transcription, check it out on the site. And now it's time for the Ad Fail 5, a rundown of the lowest moments in advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. And first up, when you're the chairman of Papa John's, already dealing with the negative PR of standing against the NFL players' protests, Peter, it's probably not a good idea to trot out the N-word on a conference call with your agency, no matter what the context. I mean, I'm
or at any time at all.
Right. I'm like, hey, who thought this was a good idea, especially given the situation he's in? It's like, you're adding fuel to a burning fire.
Yeah, I don't know. And his explanation of what they were trying to do was kind of strange. The whole thing is rather unfortunate. I think we're going to see a lot more of this.
I would assume so. Now, next up, 2 more agency executives bite the dust over bad behavior. Jeremy Perot, a top creative veteran at McCann Health, and Ogilvy Chief Creative Officer Tom Kai Meng. Darren, I'm looking at this, and it just seems like it's an endless parade of male failure going on in our industry right now.
Oh, yeah. It's like Peter said with the Papa John situation. It's going to continue to happen. Things are going to continue to be uncovered. I just tell you to expect more.
No,
Can I just make one comment?
Yes, please.
It's going to happen because we're all human. Okay, and we're living our lives under microscopes with social medias. I mean, we are bound to screw up. That's what humans do, and it's just a matter of time. So I'm not excusing his behavior. I'm just saying that we're all going to screw up, and all we can hope for is that we're going to get some kind of compassion.
To that point, I think they talk about. Which we're going to have a conversation on and figure out how do we reckon with grace and understanding, as with also acts that may not align with our values. So it's a definitely big conversation.
Well, next up, an even funnier, if not more disgusting, crazy story that came up this past week. Winemaker Lot 18, in partnership with MGM, released a selection of wines based on The Handmaid's Tale. Oh my God, I can't believe they did this, Tristan. Anyway, based on The Handmaid's Tale, because nothing pairs better with abuse and rape like a fine Pinot inspired by Offred's strength and determination.
Yeah, Bob, a guy I used to work with many years ago at the ad agency used to have a game he would play, and maybe your listeners could play and write in, which was always try to think of what's the worst possible brand extension we could conjure up. Preparation H cereal. Whatever, you could go on and on, but I thought of him as soon as the story came up.
I figured this is kind of the other side of the coin on the Me Too movement. It's the no, we're not going to go with the Me Too movement and try to extend our brand completely in the other direction.
Now, next up, minor league baseball team, the Montgomery Biscuits. I should just end it right now. The Montgomery Biscuits created Millennial Night. Reading from the tweet, Tamara, this is great, Tammy. Riverwalk Stadium will be millennial friendly on Saturday, July 21st with a participation ribbon giveaway just for showing up, napping and selfie stations, along with lots of avocados. Obviously, quite a few people were not amused by this.
Yeah, I mean, they always say that tone doesn't properly translate in email and text and so on, and be very careful. I think that this is one example of, the humor or the sarcasm not being picked up.
Maybe
it was just it was a bomb.
Maybe you shouldn't have Gen Xers or older generations write stuff aimed at millennials.
Yeah, maybe that could be the first rule of advertising.
Right.
And last but not least, in a sales promotion gone horribly, horribly wrong, Darren, Build-A-Bear Workshop offered bears priced at the age of your child for one day only. What could go wrong? One terrible day.
My sister shared this on Facebook, and I just imagined the horror that someone would have to sit in lines and it's just too crazy. I think it was a cute promotion, but I wonder if the value was there.
They really should have thought through this. Nobody thought through this. And it happened across the entire globe. I mean, their entire global footprint participated in this, and there was crying children at every single location.
One word, nightmare. I would not want to be a Build-A-Bear employee at that day.
Well, have something to add to this list or just want to discuss it? Comment online. Use the hashtag AdFail5. That's pound, AdFail, and the number 5. Well, that does it for this week's show. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an iTunes listener, we've also provided a direct link to the iTunes Music Store, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory of iTunes. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
Like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. It's just like, okay, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly.
I want to apologize on not being slow on unmuting when when you were reaching out to me. Somehow it actually played really well in that it was in the lack of attention segment, but
It's like exactly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Exactly.
Cool beans.